everybody for joining us this afternoon. As indicated, this is a recorded session, and I'd like to thank Dr. Campbell for joining us. And just before we get started, just would like to go through our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and within the Treaty 3 territory, and we acknowledge the Métis who also call this area home. So thanks again. We've been working with Dr. Campbell all year, the administration, managers, quite a few of us, and his insights and his words are quite inspiring. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peg. I want to say welcome again to everyone. Welcome to this conversation. This is a recorded conversation. And so we're going to invite you to remind your peers when we send this video, the recording tomorrow, it will be available for you to share, but also to text people to say, hey, come right in. So myself is a co-host, Carly, Peggy is also a co-host. We'll let people in the room. So if you're quote unquote late, you're not really late to join the conversation, you'll always be let into the room. So let me say once again, welcome to everyone. Welcome to this 4-part series. We have been having conversations, as I said before, with leaders at the board level, leaders in curriculum, leaders in planning, and leaders in instructional leadership. And so we want to take this conversation to everyone. So this conversation is open to all staff, educators within the group, everyone, office administrators, persons who work inside and outside the building, absolutely. So please let everybody know this is a conversation that everybody is invited to. So we want to start our conversation looking at a topic that is quite interesting: disrupting and dismantling deficit thinking in school. And it's funny because we had this conversation with some of your leaders, I guess last year, September, earlier, or October, very, very earlier. And between that time, I want to point something out, share something with you all, Tracy. Between that time and now, I have had so many conversations about deficit thinking. However, listen this carefully, it came with the conversation with de-streaming. So deficit thinking is not new. We have been having this conversation. You and I have had this conversation. I think some of us have had this conversation long ago, but lately the conversation has taken on, I wouldn't say new meaning, but additional insights, additional conversations because of the conversations around de-streaming. So as you think of deficit thinking, I want you to do me a favor. Let's jump into some form of conversation. You don't need to turn on your mic, but just jump in the chat box. When you think of the word, when you hear the word deficit thinking, what comes to mind? When you think of deficit thinking, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? And as you're typing, I want to share with you some of the conversations we have been having in other boards, in other conversations about deficit thinking and de-streaming, and the idea of assumptions comes up. The idea of stereotype comes up. The idea of not being valued comes up. And I see in the box, people are already jumping. Thank you, Carly, for starting us off. The idea of weaknesses. Keep that word, Carly. Do not lose it. The idea of weaknesses. The idea of focusing on the negative. I love the word focus on the negative. Thank you, Tracy. Thinking without facts in place. Oh, Tamara, you're on it. Weakness-based rather than strengths-based. Marnie, always there. Good to see you. Good to see you in the space. Certain students cannot have success. The idea of certain students. This is a very conversation that has been happening about de-streaming and why. The lack of a full understanding. So this is what has happened. We have made assumptions about certain things. And it's not that you haven't used your skills, use your qualification, use your good stuff that you have as an educator to make certain decisions. But what happened is that when it comes to deficit thinking, there is a lack of. There is not a full story. There's a single story. And a lot of what we see happening around us sometimes is happening because, as you said, it's not enough information. It's a single story. So let me give you an example. What we're going to have this conversation today. we're going to examine some of the factors. And you have already listed some of the factors. You have already listed some of those factors that allows a consistent perception of deficit mentality evident in our classroom. And I want educators to understand, no, we are not here to blame. Let me get that very clear. We are not here to blame. You know, as an educator, as a young teacher, I remember thinking I did an amazing job on something. And then my principal would give me feedback, or somebody give me feedback and would say, well, you know, you missed this, or you didn't do this, or this could have been done better. And I was like, yeah. If I come with this idea, it could be better. So I was open. Thank you, James. I see you, James, jumping in there. The lack of motivation, the limited intelligences. I see, you know, I said to myself, what can I do better? So I want us to realize this is not a blaming of teachers. It is to say, you have done some great ideas. You have done some great ideas, but what is it that you can do better? What is it that we could change? Some of us have used the same pedagogies, the same approaches. Now let's get this straight. Some of us have used the same approaches for years and we have struggled. Some of it don't work. Some of us, we have used the same approaches with every single student and realize it don't work for these students. So that's what we're talking about. How do we move from deficit to strength-based approaches? How do we move? How do all of us get to grow? So we want to ask ourselves some critical questions. And one of those critical questions I like to ask is this working? Is it working? That's a simple critical question I love to ask. Is it working? Can I try new stuff? Have I tried new methods and new approaches? How do I see my students? So we want to talk more about the strength base. So it's there. If you look at the bottom, it says improve our toolboxes with strength base. We didn't say give a new toolbox. I didn't say that. I said improve our toolboxes, because every single person listening to me, I want to be respectful to say and to honor that you do have toolboxes. As educators, we have amazing toolboxes. Some of us, our tools are just not working for some of our new students. Some of our toolbox, the pandemic already said to us, this is not working. So how are we moving to those strength-based approaches? So that's why we are really here, to have that conversation, right? Really, that's the intention of why we are here, to have that very conversation, how we can grow. So I'm going to show you 3 pictures. Let's take 3 pictures, 3 pictures, just to have a conversation a little bit. So when it comes to deficit, I want to show you something. I want to show you a parent. So this picture is of a parent and a child, all right? Or an adult and a child. We are making an assumption it's a parent. It could be whoever, an adult and a child. And what we're seeing here is they are saying to us, this is what the graphic is using, my issue is unemployment and hunger. But when we look at the back, we see deficit. And we see that person, and this can be used in a financial example, but we're using it in a school example. So don't get too carried away. We're using a school example of the conversation. Those things we're looking at, these are the conversation. It's deficit. Well, I wonder what's going on. Well, she's not learning because she doesn't have her book. Well, she's not learning because her mom or dad don't care. She's not learning because nobody's interested at home. She's not learning because, and all of these are deficit, because what happened is that we don't have the full story. And some of the things you may make assumptions about, let's be frank, they may be true. But here comes a trick here, Tracy. Do we make the assumption and then we kind of give ourselves a pat on the back? Well, she's having problems at home. She's not going to learn. Her parents don't care, so she's not going to learn. She's coming to school without books. She's not going to learn. And so we kind of give up. So this is something I'm going to show you later on, where deficit thinking. I want to jump to something. Let me jump to something quickly. I want to jump to this good definition quickly. It's a part of a definition, but I want to jump to this one quickly. Deficit thinking leads to stereotyping and prejudging. It marginalizes certain people on the basis of misinformation or misconstructions, right? Here is something that I really want to point out as we're having this conversation, right? What it does here, deficit thinking is rooted in a blame, the victim orientation. So the example I just used, Tracy, I said, some of these things may be true. Some of these things may be true. Our students are coming to school with challenges. But what it does here is a blame the victim orientation that suggests that people are responsible for their predicament and fail to acknowledge that they live within coercive systems that causes harm with no accountability. And I'm going to get to something we're going to talk about, a beautiful discussion later on, because I want us to have that discussion. So let's get back to the graphic. So the first graphic we talk here, we see the issues. We're not denying that there are issues, Tracy. We're not denying that, but we are asking, how are we viewing those issues? From a strength-based approach or from a deficit approach? How are we viewing that? From a strength-based, from a deficit? So let me give a good example of something that I had in an actual school I was working with. The idea of giving students snacks. So there was a snack program. This particular student, Tracy, had a snack program. So what we did, we had a discussion about the deficit scenario. The deficit scenario was the snack program was for the kids who needed a snack, right? They didn't have enough snack, whatever. So there was the calling down of the children on the intercom system. There was the children lining up at a certain window. There was those children sitting in a certain room. So all of a sudden we see those are the snack kids. And we have a program in Jamaica as well, where when you hear how it is done with certain schools, I have a big issue with it, because what it does, it further marginalizes those children and it takes away their dignity. I want to underline that. Sometimes we have to be careful. It takes away their dignity. So what happened was that in this particular situation, this particular school, this particular program, the principal decided we're going to change how we do the snack program. And she decided on we're going to have a fruit bin or a snack bin. And the snack bin was placed at a certain part in the school, and every single person had access to the snack bin. So the snack bin wasn't for those who were hungry or those who didn't have snack or those who couldn't afford snack. It was not, it moved from that deficit to the snack bin was for anyone who wants a snack. And so intentionally, what they did for a strength-based approach was that they made sure that anyone who had a snack, whether you were a teacher, whether you were administrator, you were office staff, you were security, you were janitorial staff, anybody who wanted a snack could access the snack. So it became less targeted for and less stereotyping. And it worked. It worked. Teachers would pass by and just grab an apple. Then the principal would pass by and grab a juice box, and people would see that. And the students who grabbed things from it didn't feel like I'm only grabbing it because I'm poor and I'm doing without. And that also impacted another strength-based approach, Lynn, because then they also invited people to put things in the snack bin. And then, of course, there were people who were just willing to bring the best, reddest, shiniest apple to put in the bin because they had a pride in it, because everybody was using the snack bin. So I use that example, and I want you I just use that example to say to you, what are the ways in which you can think about something you're doing in school that has a deficit narrative to it, as a very stereotypical, take away your kind of dignity, not empowering, limiting impact, and change that into something else. And I'm going to give you another example later on. So let's continue with this conversation. The next picture I'm going to show you, is this picture. And this has also was borrowed from a financial discussion, but I want you to see that each student here is labeled. So the decks, they are labeled drugs, abuse, no books, teen mom, homeless, TV on 24/7, all the things we can talk about. But I also want you to notice that dadless was also circled there. Take a note that dadless was circled there. Homeless was circled there. How is it that we have now made our students responsible for being homeless or dadless? Because it transfers to school. Let me give an example. For the first time, I knew about 7 or 8 years ago, I had an aha moment. 8 years ago, sorry, I had an aha moment. And that aha moment for me was that in a school I was teaching, I discovered that there were a number of students who came to school from the shelter. And when school was over, they went back to the shelter. Big aha moment for me, Lynn. Major aha moment. And immediately I thought, what is my responsibility as their teacher to ensure that I created a safer space in school? I made them feel proud to be at school. I saw them, I respected them, I make sure that I maintain their dignity. And yes, they do have dignity, not because they're in a shelter. What was I doing? And I can give you examples of how a different way it is done. Children, I've known school where the children who come to the school, many of them are refugees, and they are treated like refugees. They are spoken to like refugees. And if you say to me, Dr. Campbell, how do you speak to a refugee? I'll smile and I'll leave it at that. And I say to you, they were spoken as refugees. They were treated like refugees. They were looked at as refugees because that language is grounded in stereotype and assumptions. Now we're seeing a war in a different part of the world. And all of a sudden we are seeing people who look different from what our normal picture of a refugee looks like. Because if you look at many spaces where we used to use the word refugee, it was somebody who was racialized, oftentimes somebody in a part of Africa, in a tent, ripped, hungry, looking desperate. And all of a sudden, we are learning that refugee looks different and can look different. People are refugees because of sexual orientation. They have to seek asylum in Canada because of that. So how are we seeing those issues and those kind of conversations? How are we having those conversations? How are we linking them to the curriculum? So we have to ask ourselves. And then the last one is my favorite picture. And it's an invisible backpack that students carry to school. Think about your ethics of care. When I think about the student who was carrying the homelessness in that backpack, they were carrying a lot of other stuff. So immediately, Tracy, let me give you an example what I mean by that. When I think homelessness, I now consider homework. Take a note of that. Homelessness, and I now consider homework. What was I given for homework? Did this child have the opportunity and the support in a shelter to do the homework I was given? Did they have access to a Chromebook and a laptop and devices that I would say, go home and Google this? So as an educator, this was my conversation with myself. These are the critical questions I had an opportunity to ask myself. If a child is going through a certain trauma and poverty and access and mental health and inequity, how am I responding? Right? How am I responding as an educator? I'm not talking about just a program. I want you to write a word down for me, everybody. Write down the word language. Just write the word language somewhere, because it's not about program alone in our schools. It's also about the language that we're using. So one of the first definitions I'm going to leave with you, and remember, you can take pictures of any one of my slides. When you're watching back this video, you can take screenshots and utilize and all that kind of stuff. So we see our students right here in this work with Portelli. I'm cited, there. You see that the students are seen as a laundry list of problems. These educators are unable to look past students' more challenging behavior, thus making meaningful and reciprocal relationship possible. They are unable to connect to their students. Their efforts at classroom management and instruction fail, and they in turn blame their students for what has ultimately stemmed from their negative and stereotyped views of their students. That is why we want to disrupt deficit thinking. That is why we want to disrupt deficit thinking, because what we do is that we cannot get past these issues. He's homeless. So if he's homeless, I guess he can't do my homework. What am I supposed to do? What you're supposed to do is consider in equity this student and consider the homework. Can it be adjusted? Can it be a different homework? What can be done? Can that student come to school early to use a computer lab? Can a student stay back to use a computer lab? Can a student use other opportunities to use a computer lab? True story, I'm telling you. That's how I moved a number of students in my class who had no access to device to ensure that their homework was always done. How are we creating access? As you said earlier, how are we using strength-based approaches? A strength-based approach begins with you. So here's another definition that I love. Deficit thinking is a very common way of thinking, which affects our general way of being and in constructing the world. I love this. Differences from the norm are immediately seen as being deprived, negative, and disadvantaged. It never questions the legitimacy of what is deemed to be normal, or does it consider that differences may actually go beyond expected norms? It's a very powerful thing to think about. When you have students in your school who are immigrants, racialized and different spaces, you have to consider. We talk a lot about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. We lack it because of deficit issues. We talk a lot about making assumptions and streaming. We do that because of deficit thinking. We talk about a child coming to school and just go straight to ESL because you just came off a plane and you don't have good Canadian English. These things we have to consider. Is this something deficit? Is it something missing? Because sometimes nothing is missing. We focus on the missing. And this is the last part of the statement I want you to get. It discourages teachers and administrators from recognizing the positive values of certain abilities, dispositions, and actions. Are we here to blame our students because they are different? Or are we here? And it's not about race alone and color and immigration level and refugees. We're talking about our students who are on the autism spectrum. Oh, no, he can't do this. He can't do that before even trying. Students who are in our deaf and hard of hearing program. I could tell you stories, Tracy. Start teaching a dance class. Just reach your school to open up a dance class. And students already came to me to tell me which student cannot be a part of the dance class because they're in the deaf and hard of hearing program. Strength-based approach, Tracy. When I got wind of this conversation, I went upstairs to the deaf and hard of hearing teacher. And I asked her, are there students in your class who want to be a part of the dance? And she said, yes. And she pointed on 3 students. And I said, please to send them to the rehearsal. Send them to me. And when they came into the room, Lynn, this was the deficit thinking. Well, they are not going to dance. They can't hear the music. Oh, there's going to be a problem. Immediately, I turned to some of the grade 6 kids who said it, who are not mean. They weren't being mean. They were not being mean. They were acting on assumptions. They were acting on stereotypes. They were acting on what they thought is good and proper and decent and able and efficient and effective. But their actions were wrong. I had that conversation with them later on to say to them, your assumption, your unconscious bias, all of this was wrong. So when they came into the dance class, what I did, now let's talk about strength-based approach. So deficit says to me, they cannot hear the music. It's going to be hard to teach them. Otherwise, it's going to hold back the other children who can hear the music. Maybe they shouldn't be in part of the dance club. That's deficit approach. Strength-based approach says, watch me carefully on this one. I can teach dance two ways. I can teach with the music, or I can teach totally with the counts. Never forget that. I can teach you an entire dance lane without one piece of music being played today. I could teach you an entire choreograph, an entire dance without music, because we learn to dance by counts. I'm sure you have heard maybe some of your kids run up and down 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5. That's counts. We teach dance by counts. 5, 6, 7, 8. This is an 8 count, this is a 4 count, this is a 2 count. And I taught the entire dance by counts. And then I play the music. Don't worry, we're going to have the music, Tracy. We taught the entire dance by counts. Then we play the music. And so the ones who can hear the music, where the music powerful, they are dancing up a storm because the music is now there. But the ones who can't hear the music as well, they're also dancing up a storm because the entire group learned to dance by counts. And then I could take that further, Lynn. If I wanted, I could take it further, because I learned from an amazing teacher I saw in Jamaica. And other person who I know have done this, where they got the speaker and put the speaker on heavy bass and put the heavy bass right under the wooden step, the wooden stage, so that it would pulsate. I see you smiling, Lynn. Oh, trust me when I tell you, if we dig deeper, we have the pedagogies. If we dig deeper, we find the strength-based approaches. And I'm not pushing other teachers. You know I'm OCT like you. Don't look at me as, oh, Dr. ABC. Dr. ABC has taught grade 2, grade 1, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5 split. You know, name it. I've been a teacher, a classroom teacher like you. And I have had chance as well to sit silently in my classroom on my way home from school, in a staff room, in a meeting, in a maths meeting, in a language meeting, in a literacy meeting, in the library with my colleague, in doing a research, and I've said, yeah, that didn't work so good. Yeah, let me try something else. You have to be honest. We're supposed to be reflective practitioners. So don't you think that we have not added, we have all had those days. So this is how you can push this. So think about ways in which, right now as we're having this conversation, think about ways in which think about ways in which you could have, or you can push something even further. Think about it. Think about it. Just think about it. So we talk about this already. And then deficit thinking is rooted in blame. But what we're going to do we're going to put the video on pause, and because we're not going to record our breakout rooms. But what we're going to do, so those of you who listen to the video will understand. And you can do this by yourself. You don't need a group to do it with, but we're going to do it in a group in the breakout room in a minute. This very simple chart. I want us to look at the balance and the difference. When we focus on fixing the student, fixing our people, fixing the student versus fixing the system. Nothing else but that. I just want, that is a slide I created. I created this slide. And it's funny, when I was creating this slide, I really, really wanted to fill these boxes in. And every time I tried because I go by my spirit just said, no, leave them empty. Leave it empty. Because I want us to think of the ways in which we have worked to fix the people, work on the, I'm going to call your mom, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But what can we do with the system? What the system is? I remember one example when I fought kids for years to do better on homework. On a weekend, I used to be that teacher. On a Monday morning, it was judgment. Tracy, I was that teacher, Tracy. Monday morning was a judgment because I need to see your homework that I gave you all weekend to do. And then I stopped that system. Nobody forced me to do it. I was inspired by it. I went to a workshop like this and I was inspired and I stopped. For years, I don't give homework on a Friday. Years now, I do not give homework on a Friday. Fridays for you to go have good time with your parents and your friends, go play, go swim, go do something, go run, go draw, go color. And when my students ask me for homework, I said, go find something else, do it yourself. And I've had parents who have asked me for homework and I've refused because I need my students to engage in a full, optimally rounded experience. And giving you this bunch of work to sit at your computer. I did this years ago. Remember, I've been doing this for 26 Septembers. I did this years ago as a young teacher. I make sure I packed you up with weekend homework. Enough that you couldn't even go to church because you have to do Mr. Campbell's homework. So we work at that. So let us take some time out right now to think about what happens when we focus on fixing the system. So that's our question for the next couple of minutes. What happens when we really take that time out to focus on fixing the system versus fixing the student? All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had some good discussions in your group. And of course, if you are listening to the recording a week, a day, a month, a year afterwards, then of course you also understand that we coming from the conversation looking at the system. So now let's get into it and wrap up this conversation. Why dismantle? You know, we love to use those words. You hear the words dismantle, disrupt, destroy. Why dismantle? Why dismantle? 4 reasons, 4 simple reasons I'm going to leave it to you this afternoon. Deficit thinking oversimplifies student vast and heterogeneous experiences. We are not from all the same spaces. We are not all the same. We come from different spaces. And so because of that, we talk about equity instead of equality. Deficit thinking focuses on students' perceived shortcomings rather than their strengths, right? And deficit thinking, when I talk about language, we talk about a language that further oppresses, and deficit thinking undermines. All right, so we want to get into those 4 things we want to remember. The first one we talk about is students' vast differences. If you have been in spaces before, I'm sure you have seen this kind of picture. You have seen tons of this online, and it talks about the fact that we want to approach issues of lack in school from a place of equality. What we need to approach it is a place of equity, realizing that because our students are different, they have different experiences, they come to us with different spaces, different time, they are going to need different things. You know, I remember when I used to be at teachers college, I will never forget, it was long ago, my principal at the time used to use this terminology that says, you know, we drink the same water, we sit in the same seat and taught by the same teachers, but only a few people sometimes are thriven. And, you know, as thriven. And that was a thing. We used to make it as a joke. It used to be a joke around. And, you know, years after I understood that no, we may all sit in the same classroom, but we may all drink the same water, but we do not come to the door with the same experiences. We do not receive comments made by the teachers the same way. We do not understand. Yesterday I was in a class. For instance, yesterday I was watching a teacher I was doing a evaluation, and they were talking about language class, and she was showing the students images of, you know, overt images and covert. They were talking about media, and she showed a picture and about something that's supposed to look like a Spartan headpiece, and one child said Spartan and another child said what, and I smiled. And I watched to see how they were going to discuss that, because you had to have the schema. You have to have certain background experience to immediately understand what was on the board, because it looked like a Spartan helmet. But if you don't understand medieval and Spartan and those kind of, fencing and all that kind of stuff, then you wouldn't understand the example. So many of our students do not have the same experiences. And that is why when you're teaching, when we come to talk about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, I have to remind people that culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy is an empowering pedagogy. It's a liberating pedagogy, right? It's not just, let me find a different book that says this. It's about how do we ensure our students are empowered through our teaching. And so deficit thinking also perceives students' shortcoming rather than their strength. So I have used this picture many times from the idea of one size, does not fit all. But in this particular example, I want you to notice educators operating. I'm going to quote from one. I'm going to quote from a reading by Henbach, Fiedler, Mitola, and Patini, 2019, that says educators operating through a deficit-orientated lens do not acknowledge the varied life experiences of marginalized students. Rather than encouraging students to inform the nature of the learning environment, educators attempt to fix them to fit a mold defined by society, rife with inequities such as sexism, ableism, racism, and classism. So we need to ask ourselves, really, is our pedagogy empowering? Are we using those strength-based approach? Because if you don't, what you're seeing here are students who are going to fail on arrival. Because if the exam is to climb a tree, the fish has no chance right here. I'm sure the elephant is worried as well. So how do we give all our students the experience? And the last one, not the last one, but the next one there is the language that further oppresses. I remember a principal reached out to me. I always tell the story. A principal reached out to me and she said to me, after this workshop, she said she had had an issue before, but after the workshop, the same topic we had here on deficit, she said, because of understanding more, I looked at the report card and she said, I know it was there, but she said this time it really impacted her to see the deficit language in some of teachers' report cards. And so they, as a school, decided to look at the language in report cards. Wasn't to blame Jeffrey, wasn't to blame Tamara, it wasn't, oh, Tracy, let's go blame teachers for writing bad report card. It was, they looked at their own report cards they had written over a period of time and look at the language. We actually had an activity. I'm going to share something in a minute. We actually had an activity where, give me a minute. We actually had an activity where the activity was, we were intentional about looking at the approaches they were using. And this is what that we used. The deficit scenario, the deficit approach, and the possible base. And what we did, they did an activity. And they would take a piece of the report card, a language, and place over here. They decided, not me, not the principal, that this could be written better. This could have been written better. This could have been written with a more empowering language, could have been written with more promise, with more hope, with more next steps. And so they put that there. And then on the next side, they possibly write how it would sound differently. How could I have crafted this message differently? And I love that they wanted that example. The principal wanted that. The team was ready. And we had a good time doing that because we saw for ourselves that the language is an issue. And I want you to realize in the presentation I'm showing you in my slide that language is by itself. So I want you to know this is not a wondering if language is an issue. In the reading that I'm doing, in the research that we are doing, using this research here, language was listed by itself. So think about language. The next one, as we wrap up, it undermines. We need to ensure that inclusivity is not enacted with a systematic framework organized according to a deficit mentality on the part of educators, policymakers, or theorists, right? We believe that enacting or embracing a deficit mentality whilst dealing with differences undermines the most fundamental objective of inclusion, to fulfill the basic rights of all in an equitable manner. And that's by Portelli and Koenig, 2018. So even when we're helping people, even when we're putting these policies in place in our school, equity policies, ask yourself, are those policies strength-based? Are those policies, is there anything in that that is still rested in deficit? You know, I've seen people struggle with language. I have seen people struggle with language. I've seen people make mistakes, and that's fine, you know, but how do you work towards growth? We will make mistakes. Just so you understand, we will make mistakes. So how do you work? So for us, we're going to go to this. It's a preview of our next time we're going to meet, which is going to be on April the 12th. So tell everybody to gather around. We're going to send this video tomorrow. Everybody will have a copy. You can share it with any single person in the board who is a part, not just for teachers. It's not a conversation only for teachers. And I'm going to keep repeating that, because I'm going to say this to you right now. A lot of the deficit language happens in that main office, in that front office. I have heard office managers greeted and spoke and speak to parents and students in such deficit tones and language. You'd be surprised. So no, this is not for the teachers only. This is for the custodians as well. One of my most racist experience I've ever had in a school was through a custodian. So this is for all of us, all of us. So this is not open to teachers only. Let me make it clear. We're having conversations with anybody on the board who works here to come let us have conversations. So one of the biggest things we're going to leave with us is that when we break down deficit, we're going to make sure we hold high expectation. So the way to do it is for us to hold high expectations. So we want to go there. This is where we're going to begin our work in our strength base. So when we come next time, we'll talk about that. So as we leave, I want to give you this final image. This final image, I think is final image, yes. Remember, Tracy, we didn't say we're going to be pretentious and fake and pretend like things are not missing. We didn't say that. We know things are missing. We know our students come to school with issues and concerns. We saw the backpack. We saw the invisible backpack. Want to go back there? We saw the invisible backpack. It's not a pretend. We saw the invisible backpack. We have students with access, with poverty, with inequity, with mental health issues, inequities, mental health issues, homelessness, you name it, abuse, molestation, everything is there. You know, when I've done this activity with my class before, and they listed tons of stuff, my class at the University of Toronto here. So I want you to understand that we're honest about what is the thing, but what we have to focus on is not what is so missing, but what is it that we have. How do we go to strength-based approach? Remember my story with the dance with the children? They couldn't hear the sound, the music well. That was missing. Good hearing was missing, or 100% hearing was missing. But what was there? They had the physical capacity and the capability to dance. The passion and the willingness and the interest was there. And that's what I used. I worked on that. That's what I use. And so as we close, strength-based approach, these are just few that teachers have used, have listed with me. You know, I love for us to list them ourselves, right? Active listening, language of hope is a major one, promoting student voice and differentiated instruction. That was a big popular word years ago, differentiated instruction. We don't hear it as much anymore. It's not out of style, it still works. It still works for us. So I want to leave you there. I want to leave you there. I want to leave you I want to leave you there today. And, you know, follow me on social media as well to gain more, to hear, to interact. A lot of teachers, I see you all on LinkedIn and on my Twitter and also on my Instagram at Teachable Moments. And I post all my stuff there and you comment and we talk and we grow together. I'm always posting stuff there, you know, especially on my LinkedIn. You could join LinkedIn and feel free to always add me to your LinkedIn. Once you're an educator in this work, we're adding each other because we want to grow from this experience. So thank you so much for engaging in this first of a 4-part series. It's, as I said before, the recording will be sent and you share. And we'll come next on the April the 12th when we talk about holding high expectations for all students. Moving from deficit to strength-based approach, holding high expectations for all students. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Again, you're always gonna have so many insights and challenges for us to listen to. So thank you very much. And yes, we'll be talking again, and we'll see you on the 12th.